In any larger endeavor, there comes a defining moment, a point of no return. For me, this moment came on the 16th January 2023, when I ordered an auto crane to put the big boat into the water. Once the crane had deployed its arm, that's when I realized that this is actually going to happen now. As the crane slowly lifts the boat, the steel crackles in excitement. Once completely in the air, the areas where the boat rested on the stands need to be cleaned and painted with anti-fouling. And so after making sure that all the areas on the underwater ship had been cleaned and painted, it was time to go. So, there you have it. The big boat is finally back in the water. At this point, without any load, the transoms hardly touch the water surface. Overall, it lies nicely in the water. The stern lies a little bit lower than the bow, but that was to be expected. On the inside, we checked of course if there were any leaks. And so for the first few days after the boat was back in the water, we would do regular checks of the hull's water tightness by running up and down the inside of the boat and checking each square millimeter of the boat's floor for any water intrusions. At one spot, water would come in between the riveted steel plates, but I was able to weld this shut while the boat was still hanging on the crane. And then there were a few of what I would call micro holes, which showed up only a few hours or maybe days after the boat was put into the water. I would fix some of those by welding a small plate on top of them, hoping for the best. But rest assured, except for a handful of those micro holes, the boat's hull is absolutely watertight. As far as I'm concerned, that big turning point I mentioned earlier was a total success, and I am beyond myself with joy and gratitude that everything went so smoothly. Now we can finally move on and away from this place to an unknown future and hopefully plenty of new adventures. But before we go, let's go back in time a few days, back to where the boat was still on the hard stand, so I can show you the remaining works we had to finish before the boat could go into the water. I'll start with that old second-hand dual control box to control the two outboard motors. For those, we need special cables for Mercury motors. I already drilled a hole through the deck where I can fit all 4 control cables through. Next, I'm going to install the throttle and gear change cables to each of the 2 control boxes. Then I install the cables at the motors. I install the 2 control boxes onto a random piece of wood, because at this point my goal is to get things done quickly, not necessarily aesthetically pleasing, knowing that I will have all the time in the world to do these things properly once the boat has arrived at its next destination. So for now, the control boxes to control the engines are in place, and with that we can move on. I had to come up with a way to prevent any larger objects, animals or even people to get sucked into the bow thruster's propellers. So I added this grill in front of it. To attach it, I used screws that can drill their own hole directly into the steel. Together with a small washer, this worked perfectly fine to keep the grill in place. First, I would mark the position of the upper 2 screws. I drill a pilot hole and just have a look at how this screw digs its way into the steel. After I put the grill in place, I draw the outline of the arc with a permanent marker. I mark the positions for where to place the remaining screws, and then I cut out the shape of the arc. I pre-drill the remaining screws and then put in the grill. I'm gonna use this 1 mm thick galvanized piece of sheet steel to cover the periphery of the arc in an effort to make it more hydrodynamic. I leave it open in the back so that water seeping in through the grill can escape. Now let's attach the piece of sheet steel on the port side, and then this task is complete. Of course here, right at the end, the head of a screw breaks off. Not to worry though, I'll just cut that off and place another screw right next to it. And with that, the bow thruster is finally complete. We did add a layer of anti-fouling onto the grill to prevent any sea life from attaching to it, but we did that off camera. At some point, I fixed that fin. It was loose and crooked. I tied it to the back of my car to keep it straight. First, I welded in some reinforcements so that it couldn't move anymore. Then I ground down the areas and put on some primer and anti-fouling. One small thing off the to-do list. Next, let's deal with those transoms, where a lot of viewers have pointed out that they will most likely create a lot of drag while driving. For this, I got a piece of 2mm thick galvanized sheet steel, with which I'm going to close off the bottom part of the transoms. I'm cutting 2 flaps on either side, which I then hammer upwards to a 90-degree angle. I round off the corners, then I put it back in place so that I can drill the holes. I add some M6 bolts. Now, in order to give the plate some stability and to create some kind of a reverse ramp to guide the water underneath the plate and to prevent it from going on top of the plate, I'm going to bend a section of the plate by a few degrees with, admittedly, very crude methods. In the end, it turned out not too bad. Now let's quickly finish the second plate. And with that, the transoms are now also finished. And that concludes today's episode. Remember to check in next time when we do the remaining finishing touches and then finally take this thing on its first big trip.